Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you are, and welcome to ICG at Work series. This webinar is part of a series where ICG demonstrate and present our new and existing practices across the globe. And today we have the opportunity to present a new practice, our ICG Global Practice for Sustainability and ESG. And the global lead for this is Tim House. Tim, welcome on board. And Tim is based in London. We are also happy today to have a special guest, our global CEO, David Maloney from Sydney, and I would like to welcome him as well. Before we start and before I hand over to Tim, please, at the end of our session, we will have time to answer your questions. So if you need to answer any question or if you have any comments, just click on the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen and you'll be able to write us your question. And at the end, I will be reading all the questions and Tim will answer them as well. So let's start by introducing Tim. Tim is our global lead for sustainability and ESG practice, supporting boards and C-suites in facilitating the formation of their ESG strategy. Tim is a former British Army officer with international operational experience in many parts of the globe. He held senior leadership positions in the British Army, Chief of Staff, Chief Security Officer, to name a few, and he spent 6 years working for the United Nations on loan from the British Army. He led the team that resolved multiple crises in the UN's United Nations peacekeeping operations around the globe. Tim has seen at first hand the devastating effects of climate change and its global implications on society, business, and humanity. He has been using this experience to help business plan sustainability campaigns in many countries around the globe. So with any further ado, I would like to hand over to Tim now to start his presentation. Tim, welcome aboard.
Wade, thank you very much indeed. And it's very good to see you all and thank you for joining us. So I'm going to talk this morning about the sustainability imperatives. It's a complex situation with many risks and opportunities. There is clear action that companies must, should, and could take. And I will explain a pathway to implementing and delivering a successful sustainability strategy. So first of all, to get us on the same page, let's understand what sustainability really means. And here are a couple of important definitions. So the first one is really a higher level philosophical definition, which I think speaks to all of us as individuals. And it's worth stepping back from the day-to-day noise and actually reflecting on the world that we live in. It's about development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. And secondly, really to bring it down to the level of the enterprise. And that is to say that sustainability is also the environmental, social, and governance dimensions of the business's operation and performance. And essentially, ESG is shorthand for sustainability. We've all seen the headlines. And I think one of the things about sustainability, it is not corporate social responsibility, CSR 2.0. Floods in China, in Germany, wildfires in North America, in Turkey, in Greece, in Australia, ensure that the effects of climate change are never far from our front pages. So we're going to be constantly reminded of this issue. Bottom left-hand corner there is my own personal experience of climate change when I was flying over the northern region of Darfur in Western Sudan, and we came upon this village which had recently been attacked by the militia. And that particular crisis in Darfur had been driven in part by the desertification of the Sahara, which brought the nomadic tribesmen into conflict with the resident farmers. And essentially that was one of the early genesis of the conflict in Darfur. And I remember watching and visiting an IDP, internally displaced people camp in Darfur, and through my interpreter came to understand that many of the refugees there would be seeking to escape, make their way across the Sahara, across the Maghreb, over the Mediterranean, up through Europe and into the United Kingdom, because Sudan was a former British colony. And in fact, in the last couple of months in this summer, significant numbers of Sudanese have literally washed up on the southern shores of the United Kingdom. And just a vignette to explain how far away implications for climate change can affect all of us in the near abroad. And frankly, whether it's an example like I've just given, or a direct implication, you can see from those climate events that are occurring around the world, how the value chain is being significantly disrupted as well. The data behind it is irrefutable. Rising temperatures, degradation in biodiversity, and disruptions to agriculture and food security are endemic. And the bottom right-hand slide there, just an indication of how agriculture is being influenced. And I think one of the significant strategic trends that we are having to watch very carefully now is what is happening to the food security situation around the world. It will be another cause of tension and potential conflict with far-reaching implications. And there are concomitant implications for business as well. CO2 costs are rising. Personal liabilities, chief executives are now finding themselves in the dock being prosecuted for claims around greenwashing, where it is felt that they have been misleading investors, but also opportunities as well. In the bottom right-hand corner there, Q1 of 2021, nearly $200 billion worth of money flowing into green ESG funds. So there are huge opportunities for businesses to access capital if they have a strong ESG story and an authentic one. I think that's a prescient question. The United Nations General Assembly is sitting this week, and many of the world leaders are addressing issues around climate change. We've got COP26 coming up, being hosted in Glasgow in November. Governments, I think, are racing at the moment to square away as much as they can before COP26. And I would anticipate a raft of legislation and government regulation in relation to climate change that is going to have a significant impact on all of us. Bring it back to the company level. Many of you, I'm sure, will be familiar with this slide. And it's just an interesting trajectory of how components of market value in the S&P 500 have changed over the decades. And whereas value was pegged almost exclusively to tangible assets in the 1970s, you now follow those trends to where we are today, with 90% of enterprise value now being made up of intangibles. And a lot of those intangible assets fall into the sustainability domain. That is to say, the ability of a business to optimize all forms of capital. It's natural or environmental, social, human, intellectual, its leadership, all contributing to its brand and reputation. And it's not all about the climate. This is an interesting piece of work that was really started by Bank of America Merrill Lynch. They did some research into 24 significant ESG events that occurred in the S&P 500 between 2014 and 2019. And they found that those 24 events resulted in a market cap loss of $34 billion. That information was then picked up in a research paper by a chap called George Serafim, who was one of the founders of the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, based in San Francisco. And he did some research with Harvard Business School into thousands of ESG events, and concluded, and this is one of the early pieces of work, to link the change in ESG fortunes with price fluctuations. And he calculated that share price for listed companies could fluctuate anything between plus 5% and minus 3% of stock value in relation to a positive and negative news story around ESG. Now, these were for listed companies, but it doesn't take a huge leap of imagination to understand how perceptions of value can read across into privately owned companies as well. I think we're going to see much more work in this space in terms of absolutely quantifying what ESG means in financial terms. So, what to do? From my perspective, I think there are things that we must do, that we should do, and that we could do. I won't argue too much about the should and the could. You will have views on whether some of those issues should move into the to move to the left. So, for example, in absolutely must do, there are a number of things that could be put under the comply with emerging law and regulation basket. But the first thing I would say is that companies absolutely need to establish an ESG governance system and appoint a strong and credible leader, because without that strong leadership, the rest just simply will not happen. It stands to its common sense that companies must comply with current law and regulation, but in a nod to what I said earlier about COP26 occurring in Glasgow in November, have an eye to the future and how emerging law and regulation could be changing. And clearly, companies need to prepare for severe weather events at an absolute minimum. Now, all of these things need to be done, and the extent to which they are implemented by a business, I think, will be a combination of leadership commitment and engagement by the workforce, their skills, their enthusiasm, and their time. But increasingly, stakeholders are expecting companies to get on with this and to take action along the lines that I've listed there. So we've come up with a 6-step pathway for companies to implement a robust sustainability strategy. Now, there is a logical chain of reasoning and a sequential flow that goes from the 12 o'clock position around to the 11 o'clock position there in a clockwise direction. But I'd like to stress that these are not necessarily linear or sequential. Indeed, many of these steps will be concurrent, and some indeed may precede others. But it's a useful mental model and a checklist of the critical things that need to take place. And I'll now walk you through each of those steps in a bit more detail. So step one is, let's assess the resilience of the business. And I think this is a step worth doing, because sustainability is about resilience. It's about the ability of your business to endure for many decades and to flourish in the process. And by conducting this step first, it will root further considerations of sustainability in the core business model and how robust it is to deal with future scenarios. The first step is to consider what are your centers of gravity. And the center of gravity is that entity within the business that delivers the most effective capability, without which you would not function. And there's a series of questions around this, and it works very well in a workshop environment with your senior leadership team to consider what is that entity, both internal and external, that delivers what it is that you do. The second question is, what is the critical capability? What is it that it does so well? What are its critical requirements? And what are its critical vulnerabilities? And it's interesting to hear people's different perspectives on what constitutes the center of gravity. And eventually you come down to one or two. You then hold that thought and move forward through the next stages here, which is to consider future scenarios and future events that could have a significant impact on your business. You could use the STEEP mnemonic, for example. So those trends and those drivers in the social, technological, economic, environmental, and political domains. What could happen in those 5 domains that could have a significant impact on your business? And it's about trying to make a list of things that do not occur to you. Very difficult thing to do, but it's about using your imagination and positioning yourself forward and thinking about crises that could come to pass. And there are many that are occurring at the moment, and there aren't probably many businesses that anticipated them particularly well. You then consider those future scenarios. You then look at what strategies are required to cope with them. And there will be a number of strategies that are common to them all, in which case isolate those. It becomes the low-hanging fruit, an absolute no-brainer to implement them so that you position your business to deal effectively with a number of scenarios that could come to pass. And then crucially, you have an action plan and then it's implemented. And you keep revisiting this. It's a work in progress, but it will be very insightful. And it also, I think, reassures stakeholders, both internal and external, that first and foremost, your journey into sustainability is about making sure that the business can survive and do well in the sector that it operates in, that it doesn't get distracted by aspects of sustainability and ESG. So that's the first step. The second step is just to consider all of your literature and the narrative around what your business is up to, marketing, advertising, statements in filing reports, anything which could be misconstrued as greenwashing. There is significant risk at the moment. I mentioned earlier personal liability for chief executives and being sued by investors at the moment around some false claims. And this is becoming a really hot topic. So I brought this forward early in the process because I've seen a lot of this, and the images on the screen there are some of the very high profile cases that have taken place in Europe. It's just a case of look at what is being said about your company's operation. And if there's something in there that cannot be underpinned by credible evidence, then remove it. It really is not worth it. And also look beyond what it is you're doing and question your value chain. Because sometimes I think there's a lot of disingenuous claims around what a business is doing, whilst conveniently forgetting or ignoring some of the toxicity around the supplies. So that's the second step. And that's done, incidentally, concurrently through everything. So step three, this is where the heavy lifting is done. Assess the company's ESG performance. Now, you may well have been directed by stakeholders, particularly investors, to select one framework. This one here is a summary of the framework that's used by the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, or the Value Reporting Foundation, as it is now. And on the left-hand side there, SASB breaks sustainability down into 5 dimensions: environmental, social capital, human capital, business model and innovation, and leadership and governance. And then there are 26 universal performance indicators on the right. And behind each of those universal performance indicators, there are a series of detailed questions and protocols that you step through when you are conducting an audit into your non-financial performance. And one of the key processes here is to identify which of those performance indicators are relevant to your business. And this is really all about materiality. And materiality is a key watchword in sustainability. You can look at a framework such as this. If you're in the real estate sector, you've got GRESB, you've got B Corporation, you've got the TCFD, the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, which is being headed up by Mark Carney, the former governor of the Bank of England. There are a number that are out there. Lenders have proprietary frameworks that they want companies to jump through. So select a framework, decide which one fits your business. You may wish to take the approach of conducting a sort of Venn diagram, look at those different frameworks, and you'll see that a number of the performance indicators actually overlap. And you just need to decide which framework is the one that suits your business particularly well. And then you step through the hoops in a logical way, answer the questions, discover the data, and move forward on that basis. It's boring stuff, and there is no silver bullet to doing this. It's labor intensive, it's hard work, and it actually requires a lot of effort by people, particularly at that junior level, when they are pouring through your energy bills, for example, and trying to calculate where your significant emissions are coming from. So this is very important, but it's pretty unglamorous. So choose the framework and then just move through it in a steady and logical way. The next step is to ask yourself the question, so what? Having done your discovery and you understand where you are, you can then start to think, well, what do we do about it? And again, I've used the framework of things that you must, should, and could do. To the left there, absolutely know where you are. Benchmark your performance around those dimensions of sustainability in relation to your peers and in relation to government legislation and policy, and to make sure that as an absolute minimum, you are in compliance. And you won't know if you're in compliance until you've done that discovery. So left-hand side there, know where you are. In the middle there, things that you should be doing. And I've just put in parenthesis there. It's sometimes useful to conduct what I call subtractive thinking. Think about the things that you could stop doing in order to enhance your performance, to cut costs, and to streamline systems. And then on the right-hand side, things that you could do, and in fact you will almost certainly need to do, which is to do some investment into new capabilities and to transform the business into a way that is much more sustainable. And I think an honest conversation needs to be held with investors and at the boardroom, is this acknowledgement that if you are going to embark on the sustainability journey, you are going to have to be prepared to invest, and in order to realize the subsequent gains and opportunities that flow from it. It's not a free lunch in the short term, that's for sure. Step 5, and this is a pretty Billy Basic slide, is to, first of all, on the right-hand side there, map all of your stakeholders who could have a significant influence on your business. And this is where I like to talk about the human terrain, because again, quite often I've worked with companies that will talk in rather broad terms about their stakeholders. Actually, it's worth identifying who in that stakeholder constituency might be particularly influential, named individuals. Take it down to as much detail as you possibly can, and think very carefully about how they would need to be communicated with. On the left-hand side there, you take your ESG performance data that you discovered in step 3 through the audit, the deductions that you made during step 4, and then you construct your narrative, your story around your strong sustainability and ESG performance. And then you select multiple channels and you communicate in an authentic, credible and transparent way exactly what it is you're doing. And for those of you who are familiar with Professor Robert Shiller, he's written an excellent book, about narrative economics, the ability of a story to enhance the perceived value of an enterprise. And of course, the converse is true for companies whose ESG and sustainability performance is weak. And step 6, arguably, is step 1, which is to internalize and institutionalize your ESG capability. And just some considerations and thoughts here around establishing the team that you want to lead your sustainability capability. In terms of the purpose, think about it as becoming a team who can form your center of excellence for sustainability thinking. You'll be familiar with the phrase design thinking. I think sustainability thinking can provide you with a very useful lens through which to view your operation. This team will make sure that your purpose, values and vision are aligned with the principles of sustainability. For example, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, principles for responsible investment, and the like. It implements the firm's ESG strategy. So it is responsible, it owns those 6 steps and makes sure that there is an action plan and that people's feet are held to the fire. And it owns the narrative and feeds the strategic communication plan. It flags ESG risks, it prevents greenwashing, and it identifies opportunities. And it contributes to the ongoing change and transformation agenda in the business. Structurally, consider the merits of having it report to the board rather than the chief executive. There are elements of sustainability that do fall into compliance and risk, and it sends a useful message, I think, to stakeholders if an organization such as this reports directly to the board, and it separates that command and control and removes sort of conflict of interest type concerns. Think about having people who have the appropriate ESG competencies. It's essential, and there may be a requirement to hire externally in order to give you a genuine and authentic capability. The core functions of the business must be represented in that conversation. Think back to the first point about resilience. Where you get real power and energy from this process is where you have the convergence of sustainability thinking with detailed knowledge and understanding of your business model, I would implore you not to outsource this process, but to internalize it and therefore derive the benefits of such a process. Consider bringing your joint venture partners inside the tent so that you're all on the same page and you have a similar philosophical view about sustainability, and that you can align early. Because if you don't, you may then have the challenge of coming up with your own strategy, your own narrative, and then finding that some of your key partners or suppliers indeed are on a different agenda. So just a thought to consider that. And of course, it can establish subordinate working groups as required. In terms of membership, do appoint a strong and credible leader. Otherwise, this simply will fail. Heads of core functions, including human resources, to help you align the talent, the human talent that you need within there. Consider identifying proponents for the different dimensions of sustainability. Look around your business for staff members who are just naturally enthusiastic and are inclined to help put their shoulder to the wheel because they think it's important. And there are a lot of people, that younger cohort particularly, who are really energized by sustainability. And this is a great way of energizing and unlocking their thoughts and their ideas. And consider bringing on board external experts and establish relationships with academia. The committee needs to be connected. Its rhythm and tempo needs to be such that it is making a useful and a timely contribution to the debate. It's connected to the external ESG community, which is growing on a daily basis. Connects with the ratings agencies, for example, the thought leaders in this particular area, and as I mentioned, consider hooking up with some of the leading academic and scientific institutions to derive the benefits of the research work that's going on. And incidentally, a lot of universities, and certainly true here in the UK, I work with people from UCL who are desperately keen to conduct research into sustainability with real companies to get that empirical evidence. And they're providing some fantastic insights. And in return, after a little bit of research money, it's a very cost-effective and innovative way of accessing some great brains in this particular space. And its ethos there really speaks for itself. Crucially, it needs to be forward-looking, which brings me on to one of the core functions, I think, of an ESG committee, which is to establish as a key capability an ESG knowledge hub. And this is a concept that is forward-looking. It is seeking information from a wide variety of sources and is absolutely ruthlessly focused on relevance and materiality. And I've simply placed here on the page a number of issues that companies should be considering in terms of what could happen in the future. COP26 I mentioned. Supply chain performance indicators around sustainability will give useful insights into where there could be some problems lurking. Severe climate events. Look at the carbon offset projects, not a very popular topic, and people have different views on carbon offsets, but there's no doubt about it, it's going to be, I think, very necessary during the transition phase to net zero. Understand your local community dynamics, anthropological trends, law, policy and regulation, and how that might be changing, innovations in the science and technology fields, and geopolitics. There are many different ways in which this can be established within a company. And then I've placed it within a broader framework of the OODA loop, the Boyd cycle, which is to observe the activity that's going on in some of those domains, orientate it to your business in terms of defining that which is relevant. You make a decision at a very senior level, and then you act upon it. There's a lot of interest in this particular concept that I'm finding from companies that I'm working with at the moment. So if you've managed to do all of that, then you should end up with an ESG strategy, which has gone from amber, i.e. a work in progress, into something that you are comfortable with. And this is going to be an annual process, because ultimately the disclosure around sustainability is an annual requirement. It'll be done concurrently with your financial reports, and then we'll get sort of an alignment, and things will change. It's a rapidly evolving space. The market is not standing still in this, and we need to be agile and aware of just how much evolution is taking place. And on that note, I will pass back to Wade. Thank you very much.
Tim, thank you so much for an excellent presentation. The contents and the framework is very sound, and I can see the evidence behind that. So congratulations on this great work. And I would like, before I ask David to comment, I would like to inform all participants, if you have any questions, please click on the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen and just write your question. I'll be able to read them for you, and I'm sure Tim will be more than happy to accept all questions and answer them. So while we're doing this, I will invite David in. David.
Well, Wade, thank you very much again for hosting this excellent series, and Tim, well done on your presentation. I think what I see and hear from my clients globally is that ESG is no longer optional. It's something that everyone has to get on with, and as soon as possible. And if I was to try and characterize the conversations that we're having with our clients, I think the response is falling into one of three categories. The first is a diagnostic. Where am I at? Help me understand what I've done so far, and where do I sit on the ESG maturity curve? How do I understand and plot the curve and start to build a trajectory using some of the types of tools that Tim has outlined today. The second type of conversation we're having is, I need a program. The board or some external influence has catalyzed a need for a comprehensive response. And at that point, we sit down with our clients and we map out an end-to-end program for how they, as Tim put it so well, turn their ESG stance from amber to green. So build a strategy and then build the capabilities that are required, and then get it to peer or best practice. And the third type of conversation we have is, as part of my ESG program, I feel weak in a particular area. Do you have the expertise or the experience in a particular part of the program or around a particular topic where I can draw on that expertise to fill or close a gap? So from our point of view, this is essential work. It's very important to ICG. We've put a lot of effort and time into building our practice and supporting Tim. And we see already quite significant legal and economic consequences for those executives, CEOs and boards who are suffering repercussions already from not acting fast enough. So, I encourage you to reach out to Wade and Tim and start a conversation as soon as possible. So thanks for the opportunity to contribute, Wade.
Thank you, David. I appreciate. Okay. Tim, we have a couple of questions here. The first question here from Daryl Dumper from Singapore. Do you think there is a role for sustainability-linked loans, SLLs, and other methods of tying finance to sustainable development goals, or it is a modern version of greenwashing?
I think there is absolutely an opportunity to make those linkages. But be very mindful of the accusations of greenwashing. So the approach needs to be authentic and needs to be very carefully thought through, and that it doesn't fall foul of those claims. It's a very useful lens to look at the whole world of finance, and whether it's a credit assessment tool, for example, or the frameworks that many of the lenders now are putting in place. It's absolutely crucial, I think, that the world of finance embraces sustainability, thinks very carefully about how capital is being allocated. And in fact, I think it's true to say that companies are finding it increasingly difficult to access capital. And if they can, it is much more costly without a strong ESG and sustainability credential.
Okay, great. Another question here, Tim, for you. I have noticed also that it was mentioned in your presentation around the human capital, the engagement, diversity, and inclusion. So the question is about the steps that the board need to take to basically ensure the engagement of the workforce. What sort of practical steps do you think a board should be taking in that space?
When I talked about the communications step, the fifth step, That is the internal communication piece is absolutely critical, and that can be done in a number of ways, and it needs to be done effectively, because without that workforce being on board, the company will not shift its internal agenda and its internal thinking. I think a series of workshops, so you can do a sort of natural cascading of information, but I would reach out to all components of the workforce and try and identify those individuals who are particularly engaged and empower them to make a contribution into the sustainability space, and then just watch how word spreads that you are taking sustainability, thinking that it is valued, and you may wish to consider a remuneration and a financial incentive around innovation, internal innovation in terms of your workforce making a contribution to the sustainability agenda. That would be a great message to send out about how you are taking it seriously. I think the key part of this is to enable the workforce to take full part in it, because then they will benefit from the learning and training opportunities that go with it. It's part of a discovery. Engage them, delegate activities to them, get them involved, and allow them to join the conversation, and use all your communications channels internal to make the workforce aware of what it is that you're doing. And I think you'll be absolutely amazed at how enthusiastic your workforce becomes when they appreciate that you are genuinely embracing sustainability, because it will benefit them personally, particularly on issues such as diversity and inclusion. There's a lot of great research out there speaking to the enhanced performance of businesses that have genuinely diverse and inclusive workforces.
Thanks, Tim. Question from Kerry, where the ESG committee is reporting to the board, are you also proposing the committee is chaired by a board member?
It depends on the capacity, I suppose, of the board member. It could be. I think that's a conversation for each company to have internally about who they think is most suitable to chair that ESG committee. It could be somebody who exists within the company at the moment. It could be an external hire. I think one of the most important statements that a firm could make is to appoint a chief sustainability officer and recruit that person and appoint them as head of the ESG committee. It sends a very powerful message. Now, not every company will be in a position to do that, but it's certainly something that should be on the checklist of considerations going forward. So I think it really depends on who you have available, their skill sets, their aptitude, knowledge, and capacity, and then select accordingly, but also keeping in mind the option of bringing in somebody from outside.
Great, thanks, Tim. Another question here, excellent presentation. How important is a customer perception of an organization action on ESG?
Very important. In fact, some of those, so around the social capital dimension, which really is considered with such things as customer welfare, product quality, and safety. You will need to demonstrate that you have a mechanism for gathering that data in a way that is credible. So it is absolutely fundamental. It's baked into most, if not all, of the ESG audit frameworks. So you absolutely have to have systems there that can gauge the views and the attitudes and measure the feedback from your customer and client base. It's fundamental to the process.
Excellent. Thanks, Tim. I appreciate. We still have a few minutes for a couple of more questions. If you have any questions, please just type them on the Q&A board and we will read them for you. But I also will take this opportunity again to thank Tim and check in with David if he has any further comments on the question that we answered so far.
I'd like to make the observation that the epicenter of ESG thinking is in Europe. The Europeans seem to have embraced the need for ESG and its response much more aggressively than we've seen from our North American or our oceanic clients. And so what we've done in ICG is spend a lot more time building and recruiting a practice in and around Tim and supporting them and making their expertise and experience available to our clients around the world. So I'd encourage any people on this webinar to sort of think about where the source of wisdom currently resides in ESG. And if you find that your current supplier has rather parochial view of ESG based on local experience, then you probably do well to reach out to someone else in Europe and get a second opinion. So I'd just like to applaud Tim on his success in building this global practice so quickly.
Thanks, David. Please also, if you have other questions after we finish our session today, you still can reach us at icgatwork@internaconsulting.com, the email here on the screen, and the question will be answered by Tim directly. But also, if you need any support from your local team and from your local hub, please get in touch with the team, and I'm sure they will channel the questions or any inquiry through the right channels in ICG. I think we have answered most of the questions. Yeah, there's no more question at this point in time. So I will take this opportunity one more time to thank Tim. Thank you, Tim, for excellent presentation today, and thank you for answering the question. And definitely we have received a few comments here of, congratulations. So well done on that. And we will have another session in 2 weeks' time. You should receive our campaign within the next couple of days. That will be another one of the new practices that we started, and it's also from Europe. So it will be a new flavor that we haven't experienced before. And until our next session, I would like to thank you all for participating today. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Tim, and thank you, David. And we hope to see you all in our next session.
Thank you very much indeed.
Have a good morning, a good afternoon, and a good night, and we will meet soon in 2 weeks' time. Good night.